Welcome to the Recovery Report live from Texas this week. I'm your host, Rob Bowlby, where we have recovered over $1 billion for our clients over the last 11 years. We are in February now, coming up on our third full year of business here in Texas. We're very grateful for all the success we've had in Texas from our partners, from our Florida office, and from all of our clients who have trusted us to represent them in claims. So the Texas weather has improved dramatically since I was with you guys last month. We were in the middle of a very big freeze when we talked in February, had actually just come out of a freeze. And now we're here back in the 70s and even 80s this weekend. And so we figured it was a good time now that we've kind of come off all of these water damage claims to talk about mold. Mold's been a really interesting issue in the history of Texas. And I'm not sure exactly when it changed, but at some point, Texas wised up to Texas insurance carriers wised up to paying mold within their policies and made a lot of endorsements. And we're going to talk about that later on. But we've come upon a lot of water claims in the last few months, some with mold issues, some with not mold issues. So I thought it would be a really great time to have my next guest on, Evan Bache-Wiig. Evan is one of the partners with GlobalPro. We've worked with him on, I think this is our third claim we've worked with him on. We've been really impressed with them. And we thought mold is something that is really, it's actually misunderstood by public adjusters. It's misunderstood by insurance adjusters. It's really misunderstood by homeowners and business owners. So we thought we'd use today's episode to clear up a lot of misconceptions about mold and arm you, our clients, with the information necessary that when they have a claim, to make sure that the mold is covered appropriately. So Evan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And so let's kick off. Tell us about the company. Tell us about GlobalPro and how, as a young child growing up, you said, I'm going to get into the mold remediation business.
Absolutely. So thanks for having me on. So GlobalPro was started almost 40 years ago by my business partner, Tom Beeger. And he started off as a water mitigation company that employs. This would have been in I believe it was the 90s or early 2000s. Texas split the water mitigation, mold remediation, and the assessors. So Tom decided, I'm going to become an assessor, an inspector, rather than mitigate. So he gave away his equipment to a friend. He started his own company, and Tom decided to start doing inspections. And about coming up on 8 years ago, he was looking for an apprentice. And he'd been looking around, praying for an apprentice, because it needs to be a special relationship if you're going to pour your entire career into somebody.
Yep.
So I also was looking for him a change. I was in restaurant inspections at the time, code compliance. So I had learned to deliver bad news, deliver hard news, and I had learned to have a very keen eye as I'm going through buildings. And so we had a breakfast, just basically kind of met each other, spent some time. I ran a couple inspections with him, and I loved every minute of it. It's been an amazing relationship, an old school apprenticeship. So that's part of what's made me so great is Tom taking his 40 years and condensing it into my almost 8 years with him.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so let's start with the basics, because I've lived in old houses, I've lived in new houses. Ironically, when I moved to Texas, when I was buying a house, that was the first thing we discovered was they hadn't invented the crawl space. Brand new house hadn't invented the crawl space correctly, and the whole bottom part was covered by mold. And we, like most homeowners, freaked out. We're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Do we not buy it? And they went in, mitigated it, cleaned it. We ended up buying the house. But what does almost every home have some mold? And when is it a problem? Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll start with some basics. So mold is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's indoors, it's outdoors, it's on every surface. Mold spores are particles like pollen, much smaller than pollen, but they're particles. It's native to the environment, grows on leaves, grows outside, easily distributed through the air. So it's everywhere. Every house has it. There's always going to be a little bit of something there, whether that's just in your shower drain, whether that's around your sink, whether that's a little drip under your cabinet. Every house has a little bit of something. So that's very typical that we'll always find something. It's a problem when it's starting to impact the structure, impact the indoor air quality, or in a lot of cases cause distress for the homeowners. And that's very client specific on when it is a problem.
Yeah, because you've got people that have strong allergies or any type of respiratory illnesses, then it's a much lower tolerance than if you have people that are perfectly healthy and they can probably live with a little mold.
And the environmentally sensitive are our specialty. That's a niche, underserved clientele that we've been working with for the last several years and really focusing on, because it's something where a regular assessment is not sufficient, because you're getting people that are so sensitized that those really, really minor issues are affecting them. Yeah. So a regular assessment needs to be a whole next level of in-depth.
Okay. Now, I know a lot of times you guys are called on the scene when there is a claim, like
Right.
somebody has a big
Yeah.
water loss,
Mhm.
and hopefully the mitigation company is smart enough to say, whoa, there's mold here.
Right.
We need to bring in
Hopefully.
somebody. So then once you guys come on,
Mhm.
particularly with older houses, how do
Right.
you differentiate this is water loss related?
Mhm.
This is, probably been in your house for the last 15 years
Right.
and it hasn't been a problem.
Right.
And then I guess as a follow-up question, like how quick does mold, I mean, if the homeowner does their stuff right and do it immediately, how quick does mold start producing?
Certainly. Let's go with that question first. So mold will grow within a day or two, 24, 48 hours, depending on the type of material and how wet it is. Mold requires moisture and cellulose. Cellulose is wood, paint, drywall paper. So as long as those two conditions are present, mold will grow. So the mold that's everywhere, you introduce water, humidity, mold will start to grow. If a mitigation company is there within several hours and materials are removed or dried appropriately, keyword being appropriately, you're good. You don't need us. And what's most important for adjusters and for homeowners to understand is choosing a mitigation company, making sure that are they removing baseboards if they need to? Are they getting behind cabinets? Are they just putting fans, or do they actually have like desiccant dryers, dehumidifiers? So if you're catching these things early, you'll never need us.
Okay, but you're saying 24 to
48
hours.
Right.
And so, I mean, that happens a lot.
Right.
I'm trying
Truly.
to think back over the freeze claims we had.
Mm-hmm.
So we picked up 7 in January. I would say probably at least half, the homeowner may not even have been aware.
Right.
We had one where the gentleman was out of town, got a call from the police department that said water is coming out of your house.
Out your front door.
I mean, the water had probably been running for a couple of days.
Yeah.
So, it seems to me that more often than not, by the time they
It's
get
pretty
stuff figured out.
catastrophic.
Yeah. And then the other downside of this is when this stuff happens, when we have an event like we had happen in January, all the mitigation companies get busy. And it's you call them and they're like, oh, we'll be there in an hour. It's like, oh, we can be there a week from Tuesday.
Right.
And so then you automatically have mold growth. And we're going to talk about in a little bit how that impacts coverage. So what are the duties? What are the proper protocols? You talked a little bit about, if the mitigation company does their job right, but what is the homeowner's duty? And I'm going to combine 2 questions here. Yeah. So what do they have to do, or what should they do? And then if they've had mold, they're going to sell that house at some point, especially in North Texas, where we have a ton of people moving in and willing to pay you top dollar for your house. Right. What are their disclosure rules, and how do they properly document if they've had mold? How do they properly document they've done their duty to their buyer of their home? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, to answer the first part of the question, I think the most important thing is when you have a water event that's occurring, start a video, take pictures. Records are so important, and thankfully they're in our pockets with our phone. So great documentation. That helps me. That helps the mitigation company. We can see where everything went. You can prove where something didn't go. So good documentation is critical, because that's going to help everybody do their job properly. As far as disclosure, I've seen several different types of seller's disclosures, and I'm not. I think it's the TREC. I think that's supposed to be a standardized document.
It is.
I'm not sure why some of those are different, but I've seen some disclosure documents that they all ask about water damage, of course, water events. Some of them are specific to the point of asking has Stachybotrys been found, and which I find a little absurd, because Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Alternaria, Aspergillus. I mean, it's a very narrow window. It's kind of missing the point. So the disclosure document will ask the questions that you need to answer. And going back to the good documentation, if you can say, yes, we had this water event, here's the mitigation company's work, here's their moisture map showing here's what was wet, here's what was now dry, you're good. You can set that buyer's mind at ease. But if you have to disclose a water event and you're like, well, I don't know, we mopped it up with some towels, that buyer's not going to love that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think a lot of homeowners fail to think about, all the way forward when they go to sell their home. And then if they don't have proper documentation, then that suddenly, and they still sell the home, but that becomes a negotiating point.
Right.
It's like, well, I don't know. And maybe if you took another $5,000 or $10,000 off the price,
might be more comfortable with
this. And so they're not only costing themselves, the part of the insurance claim that's not covered, but they're costing themselves another 5, 10, maybe more down the road, depending on the extensiveness of it.
And that's where
to sell their house.
To plug both the restoration companies, remediation companies, and mold assessors like myself, you're spending some money up front, paying for a not paying for just a contractor to dry it, but paying for a Texas licensed mold remediation company to do your drying.
Yeah.
And you're paying for a mold assessment, that's going to be in the thousands of dollars. But if that documentation and expertise saves you $10,000 in concessions, $20,000 in concessions or more, I think it's worth it.
Oh yeah. So you touched on mitigation companies. Let's start with mitigation companies, and then we'll go through protocols and then where we fit in. So with mitigation companies, can they all do mold assessment?
Yeah. So
is there you mentioned certification. So
very important.
If you're getting ready to hire a mitigation company, what should you be looking for?
Great question. So, and to clarify, mitigation company, restoration company, remediation company, I'm using those roughly interchangeably. But an important distinction is the difference between a water mitigation company and a mold remediation company. So water mitigation in Texas, they can do drying, tear out. A lot of it looks like mold remediation, but as soon as mold is found, they're required to stop. We need a mold assessment consultant. We are not licensed to deal with mold. And this is for the health of the occupants. We cannot disturb this. We need to stop.
Okay.
So in Texas, there are laws that govern both my work and the remediation companies. And the remediation companies are licensed to basically do the work that a mitigation company is doing, but in a safer manner. They're building containments around the affected areas. They're using big air purifiers, air scrubbers to protect. But even more importantly than that, they know that they are required by law to have a mold assessment consultant, like GlobalPro, come and write them a mold remediation protocol. So there's laws that are in place that once mold is found, it needs to be handed off to a licensed party.
Okay. So because we mentioned a few parties there, so let's make sure we're clear for everybody. So, and some companies can do both, right? There's
absolutely.
Mitigation/remediation companies. They can do mold remediation, they can do water mitigation. But even if they're one of those, so to me, you'd have two scenarios. You've got the best case scenario where you've got a company that can do both. And they go out and they start the water mitigation company, and then they find mold.
And they say,
but even then, they can't write their own protocol, correct? They have to go to that's illegal. So they have to go to a third-party firm, such as GlobalPro. You guys write them protocol.
Correct.
Give it back to the restoration company. And then on the remediation side, they perform all of the duties required under the protocol.
In that protocol.
And then you come back out, re-inspect, and you give them the certificate of completion or whatever the term is.
All of this is for the homeowner to be able to provide documentation at the end. Going back to your point about let's just do this right so it's simple when you sell. And all of this also is to protect the homeowner. If you have a unlicensed contractor that's like, well, I think all these cabinets need to come out. Andrew wood floor, Andrew tile, and let's gut the upstairs because I think it's bad. Who's to say? And if your insurance carrier is like, we didn't authorize any of this, this is out of pocket. But if you have a licensed mold assessment consultant that has air samples, documentation, moisture meters, pictures, a protocol, mold remediation protocol that shows why, you're far more protected. It's way simpler to have that conversation with your carrier to justify the work that was done. So all of these Texas laws are designed to protect the consumer. Again, it's an upfront cost. That nice contractor friend or your brother-in-law, he can absolutely do the work. That's not illegal to have, or you can do the work yourself. It's not illegal. But what protections are there?
And so in the following through on that example, but if you have just a water mitigation company, then they have to not only notify you guys write the protocol, but then the consumer or the business owner has to bring in a separate mold remediation company. So then they end up with two contractors.
Correct.
So,
and what
I mean, it's a good point.
It's
complicated. I guess I don't want to go as far as saying you should only hire ones that can do both, but less parties at play. I mean, there's enough parties in the mix for an insurance claim anyway, particularly with mold. You've got an insurance adjuster, you've got the contractor, you've got the mitigation company, you've got you, and if you're smart, you have someone like us representing you as well.
It's a lot.
To add yet another company into the mix is a little bit an issue.
And what I often tell clients is you don't always, like in the freeze, you don't always have the luxury of choosing who you're going to work with. And so sometimes you just get who you get and you go buy the fans on your own, you buy the dehumidifiers on your own, and that's okay. That's one thing that we're here to help. And whatever circumstances are there, we're going to work with the homeowner to help them get where they need to go as best we can.
Which, just as an aside, it's funny that if they hire a mitigation company to do all that, the insurance company will pay for it. If they buy fans and dehumidifiers, they generally won't pay for it.
Same equipment.
Same equipment. Just we'll pay you $5,000 to rent it for an hour or two, but we're not going to pay you $3,000 to buy it yourself. One of the things that drives me a little bit crazy.
And the ideal world, and some of our, it's mixed emotions when we have repeat clients, but we're always happy to help them. But what a lot of my repeat clients do is they're like, hey, my sink overflowed. What do I need to do? They just call us. And I'll probably tell them, well, give me some details. We'll talk it through. If they don't need us, you don't need us. I'll tell you where to go. But if you do need us, I'll be honest with you and say, well, that sounds like it's a little more significant. So in the ideal world, call your public adjuster, call your mold assessment consultant, and we'll answer some questions for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Give some guidance.
And we do the same. Sometimes we call people and we're like, you're
probably
fine.
good.
Yeah, you're going to
probably
get covered.
good.
You'll be good.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned coverage. Let's talk about that for a minute, because as we've worked through a lot of these, there's been a few things that's been really interesting to me. When you look at kind of the HO3 form in Texas, the standard homeowners form, the form itself, the HO3 form, actually provides pretty good mold coverage. But what has happened over the years is as insurance carriers have wised up, there's always a Texas amendatory endorsement that almost completely removes the mold coverage. Now, where it gets gray is you have some carriers have language in there that says, as long as the mold is on the same damaged property as the water damage, it doesn't exclude coverage for the water damage. So we will pay for all of the water damage, but we won't pay for any specific mold related stuff. And that, I will tell you, what they consider mold related varies by carrier. Like obviously the cost of your assessment is not going to get included. The cost of your testing is not going to get included. But what you get into, containment and PPE. So can you talk a little bit about what's the difference between mitigating for water and mitigating for mold?
Absolutely. So, and this is, as a caveat, this is your expertise. A lot of this is, word of mouth, talking with clients and adjusters. But what I understand from talking with remediation companies is water mitigation is removing materials, dehumidifiers, air movers, drying equipment. PPE's involved. Mold remediation, and as I understand, things that often are not covered unless there's specific endorsements, antifungal paint, PPE, containments, air purifiers, air scrubbers, things that are specifically intended to manage and remediate mold. That seems to be the things that are not in our services. Oftentimes are not. There are instances where clients are reimbursed for our services because it is part of mold. But that, again, very carrier dependent.
And one thing I've noticed, and I won't say every adjuster, but most of the insurance adjusters that come out really do have the client's best interest. I mean, they're really there to try to help the client. Sometimes they get constrained by their corporation's policies. Sometimes they get overruled by people above them. But we've even, particularly on one claim we worked on, we had a really good adjuster with a carrier that just said, hey, I can't cover any of this, but let's talk about some things in your estimate that I could probably get you a little more on, and that will ultimately cover the mold assessment, which I thought was a nice move
generous,
by them. And if you can build rapport with the adjusters like that, you can really help that. And, we had one of the ones we're working on now where the adjuster just said, hey, here's what they're not going to cover. Here's what you need to figure out how to get them coverage for this, because anything mold related, they're not going to touch.
And to plug y'all, that's where y'all's expertise comes in, because like as a homeowner myself, I can read through my policy, but in having those conversations, I don't know what to ask. I don't understand the verbiage. I don't know these endorsements. And so that's why I initially started to talk with you, is you're the insurance version of me. We need an advocate for homeowners, because this is very complicated. And your house is, these clients that you're referring to, their house is in shambles. I mean, these are flood conditions. And so they're already distraught, and trying to understand their policy and make all these phone calls, it's a lot. So having you at their disposal is incredibly helpful.
Well, and we appreciate that. And we always try to find coverage for people. That's kind of one of the things we do. And that's why we, one of the things we always say when you hire us is we're going to always argue from a case based on logic. So our people come out, they write our own estimate. We review all of your documents. We review all the mitigation company's documents. We make sure whatever they pay to tear out, we're not paying to tear out, we're paying to put back. And we try to come up with a really fair estimate that can restore the homeowner to pre-loss condition. But it's hard. I mean, it is very
complicated.
And the thing I find is most adjusters don't have the time or capacity, insurance adjusters, to come out and do multiple site visits and really dig in and have the conversations with the carrier. They're there to put together a number, the carrier writes the check, and they're on to the next one.
Exactly.
And so we're there to really kind of help take the process after that and get them
keep it rolling along.
Ideally before that. If we can get out there before that, helps the process much faster. I don't think we've talked about that, but generally, if we can get the adjuster to agree upon our scope of work, the whole process goes a lot faster.
Right, and that's easier for them. Well, that's why I started this relationship with you. Is I saw how you were handling a particular client of ours in that project, and you were so facts-based. Like, let's just look at what's actually here. We're not padding anything. We're not hiding anything. The facts are the facts. Let's see what we can work with what we have. And we're very data analytical and fact-driven with our work because of we have to be.
Yep.
And we like to be. And so I saw a good partnership there.
Yeah. And we like to be too. And, one thing that you and I were talking about right before we started filming today is now the carriers have gone to many of the carriers. I think at least 3 that I've worked with has gone to a third-party firm to review anything that's kind of third parties providing mold assessment, mitigation work, or packouts. And they all go to this third-party firm, and their job is to try to kick everything out of that, or kick as much of that out as possible to save the carrier money. And so that's been a really interesting addition to the mix.
It is an evolving process.
Yes.
And this is, I would say, my anecdotal perspective has changed over this last, I would say, 2 years since the freeze. I mean, even really big carriers that are known to just write checks are taking a little more time, are starting to dig in more. It's the atmosphere, at least in our Metroplex, has changed over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think so too, which is another reason you need an advocate.
Yes.
Okay.
Advocates.
I think we kind of covered everything. Anything that I forgot to ask? Anything that you see a lot when you're talking with business owners or homeowners?
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to cover is let's talk about black mold.
Okay.
That's something that comes up. I mean, almost every client. So black mold is a colloquial usage for stachybotrys. And that's in the cultural mindset because back in the 90s up in New York.
The Chinese drywall?
Actually, I don't know. This was up in New York. There was an apartment complex or a tenement building. Something happened where there were some infant deaths involved. It was extremely tragic. And that really cemented stachybotrys in the public's mindset. Stachybotrys or black mold is a heavy water damage mold type. It's pretty infrequent on air samples. It's hard to aerosolize. It's heavy, sticky, requires a ton of water. So if you're worried about your shower drain or that little bit of mold growth around your vent, it's probably not there.
Okay.
Could be, can't always be certain, but it's a very low chance. Okay. So the other thing is Chaetomium, Alternaria, Curvularia. These are all similar types. They all can produce toxins. I want to remove some of the fear from that particular type of mold.
Okay.
And because it's something that it really grips people and their fears are usually well-founded, concerned about their kids, their health, their house, their property. But there's just a lot of nuance with doing mold analysis and mold inspections. And again, call us. We're happy to chat. My business partner, Tom, is just so caring on the phone.
Yeah.
He'll spend the time that he needs to answer questions. And whether you engage us or not, we're here to help.
Yeah.
It all comes around. So I just want to make sure that people understand that there's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah. We found that with you guys as well. And the first claim we worked on together, it was good to be able to just go back and play. I think
there was many.
You ended up coming out on that one.
There was 3 times.
Someone kept saying, I don't think this is mold. So,
yes.
Okay. Yes. How do people find you? Tell us about how do people find GlobalPro? And let's wrap up with that.
Best place is honestly just our phone number, 972-567-7298.
Okay.
That's Tom. That's Tom's number.
Okay.
And great place to start because really what clients are after is information and peace of mind. And we can't always provide the peace of mind on the phone, but we often can provide information. So that's a great place to start. Instagram, AllMoldPro, ALLMOLDPRO. I am our social media. So you're seeing some of the wild projects we're on. I protect the identity of houses and clients, but it gives some good perspective on how things can go on mold inspection. I think we're on Twitter. I don't manage it, but Facebook, Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as Evan Bache-Wiig.
Okay, very good. Well, Evan, thank you for being here today. I should clarify one thing I said, and this is another reason you want to have an advocate. You don't always have that language that says if there's mold on it, but it's still water damage. Some of the carriers have it, some don't. Yep. That's why before you disclose to your carrier that you may have a mold issue, it's always good to have some kind of representation, have somebody review your policy to make sure what policy language you have, because what you don't want to do is prejudice the carrier against paying your claim and then fight an uphill battle.
And that can be, you can talk obviously with y'all, you can talk, if you have a licensed restoration company there, ask them, they get paid by insurance. So asking them, what does this look like?
Yep. Very good. Thank you for being here
My
today.
pleasure.
That's it for our
Thank you.
recovery report live from Texas. Always good to be here, and hope everybody has a great week. Thank you.